Hello everyone, thank you all for joining, and in this video we'll be having a closer look at a zero constellation, Tartaglia or Childe, whatever you want to call him. I think he's a very fascinating unit. He has some unique skills. His skill set is very unique, but currently when I look around the internet it's all about his 6 constellations and how he can stay in his melee mode, how his range mode is useless for DPS, and I currently have found some stuff that makes me, I don't agree with it. So let's go over the stats. As you can see here, I'm still working on it. The crit rate and crit damage are not where they're supposed to be, but this is currently the gear that I have. I have some hydro damage bonus. Now I'm currently using Abel's bow. I don't recommend this bow, but it was the one that I already had built up, and I'm currently just so low on resources that I'm using it. Now it is interesting that 12% increased normal attack also applies to the melee stance, so that's nice. And the arrows, I'm actually finding myself using the ranged the bow stance pretty often, so I do get some use out of it. Now for the artifacts, I'm currently running Exile, and that's purely because I had a hydro damage cup on there that was already built. And the energy recharge is still nice. Now let's go over the artifacts. As you can see here, they're far from optimized. These aren't very good artifacts, but I just want to have something to put on him and play around with him. I have to say it works pretty okay. I do need to run crit damage in my circlet shot slots to just get that crit rate up. But I have to say this works pretty fine, but it's definitely not where I'm gonna go with him in the end. Now for the talents, I'm still building them up. Tomorrow I will be able to get some more books. As you can see, this is his normal attack. Let's go over it. His normal attack will deal 6 consecutive shots. His charge attack is where things get pretty interesting, because when you aim, it will deal hydro damage, and it will also apply the Riptide status. And Riptide is basically a core part of his kit. Now Riptide will, what it does is it provides a status effect. You will see it on the HUD when an enemy is affected by it, and it has different effects depending on what you can do. So as you can see here, Riptide Slash is when you hit him with a charged attack, it will deal some AoE damage every 0.7 seconds, and Riptide Burst, and this is what happens in the melee form. When you deal damage, it will deal a simple AoE. So as you can see here, I still am in the process of leveling. I have to say, the scaling on these skills is pretty okay for how fast he can attack. And as you can see, his 6 hit is actually going over 100% there. So I'm quite okay with the damage here. Now when we see the animation, it's fairly quick. Well, I wasn't getting all the shots in there. Yeah, there's the 6 shots. So it's decent. It's not ka-ching or anything, but it's decent. Now, as you can see here, a charge shot. This is, I feel, a core part of his kit as well. Now we get to the other skill. This is an elemental skill, and this allows you to swap into the melee stance. And then, as you can see, when you are in the melee stance, you will deal Riptide Slash. We'll go over that. But when you will also deal 6 consecutive strikes there, so he really becomes a damage dealer. But Riptide Slash is when you hit an enemy with your melee attack, it will do AoE damage, but it has an internal cooldown, so this can only happen every 1.5 seconds. And the cooldown of this ability scales with how long you stay in the skill. As I said, I'm not gonna go over. I know his Constellation 6 is good, but I will never get the Constellation 6 because I don't think it's worth it, and I think the character is very good already. Now, here's something you need to keep in mind. When you swap into his melee stance, you will deal AoE damage, and that's kinda annoying, and I will show you why. But here you can see all the damage. The Riptide Slash modifier is 82% currently, which is pretty good. And I still need to level it, but at level 6 it will deal 88% of your damage, extra hits every 1.5 seconds, so that's good. Then finally he has 2 bursts, a ranged elemental burst and a melee elemental burst. And here's where things get really interesting. So his ranged burst will allow him to deal AoE hydro damage and apply Riptide, and it returns a portion of the energy cost. And his melee stance will trigger a huge AoE, and it will eat the Riptides on enemies to allow for Riptide Blast. As you can see here, it's additional AoE hydro damage. So this is pretty interesting and pretty powerful. Now, as you can see here, the skill, currently the modifier there, I'm on talent level 4, is 580 on the melee and 473 on the ranged burst. Then, as you can see here, the Riptide Blast, so that's that additional modifier, is 150%. These are separate instances. If you use the melee burst, it's very important again. And the energy that you get back from the range burst is 20, so it's essentially a 40 energy burst. So his melee is 60 energy, his range is 40 energy once you get everything going. Now his first Ascension talent is Riptide is extended by 8 seconds, so that makes it a whopping 18 seconds, so you don't really need to worry about it. And then in his Ascension 4 stat, whenever you crit in the melee stance, you will apply Riptide. I don't know why the or. I think this is a translation mistake, because the or doesn't mean anything, because it doesn't work in his bow stance. So it's not if you crit in his bow stance that you will apply Riptide. And then his passive is pretty nice. It increases your talent levels. Now, I think what is as you can see, let's go over his elemental skill. As you can see, very quick. Some very nice attacks. Reminds me of Kaching in a way. And his charge attack as well. It reminds me a lot of Kaching. His charge attack is very powerful. Let's go over some gameplay and I will show you what I mean with the bot. So let's go over it. This is gonna showcase the range damage. So as you can see here, that was a crit, and there you can see the Riptide proc. So the first shot applied the Riptide, and there you can see it does 3 separate instances of damage, and those instances can crit on their own. So that's very interesting. Now as you can see here, this enemy has a lot of physical attack resistance, so the damage there is very lacking. Now when we go over the melee stance, as you can see here, it will deal AoE damage, and what this means is if you run him in a vaporized setup, as I'm doing, it will eat the pyro damage, which makes it very hard to proc it with your melee burst. Now, what you can see here is the damage of his melee burst is the first instance of damage, so the 8712, and there is the Riptide burst, which is an additional 2225. But again, it's very difficult to get a vaporized proc on your melee burst, and that's a totally different story in his range burst, because his ranged burst doesn't cause an AoE hydro damage instance. You can basically, as you can see here, I'll swap into the look, then get some pyro on there, go into the range, and here you can see that's 15k, and both of these instances were non-crits thanks to Vaporize. So yes, while of course if you can proc a Vaporize melee, it will deal more damage, but I think for a Constellation 0 Childe, it's much better to use the range burst, because it's literally only 50, and you can still use the melee to build up your energy, because you're only 40 energy away from max. Switch to your pyro damage dealer and then work off there. So I think he's still really good at Constellation 0. You just use him completely differently than you would at Constellation 6. So Childe, I'm definitely gonna look more into him because he's just a fascinating character. I think all the talk about his melee and his Constellation 6, yeah, of course, it deals a crap ton of damage. I won't deny that. But I think he's still extremely good at Constellation 0. You just have to use him completely differently than most of the whales. And that's fine, because that range burst is still very effective. So thank you all for watching, and see you all in the next one.